I saw Srila Prabhupada in New York in the Henry Street Temple, and when I saw Srila Prabhupada, I knew that he was looking right through me. It felt like he was looking right through me, and he could see all of my contamination. You know, I was going through some. Of course, there are 4 kinds of people who come to Krishna consciousness. So I was definitely in a distressed condition, and when I saw Srila Prabhupada, I had read something also before I saw him. So I read some of the books. I had read the Krishna book and Nectar of Devotion, and also the Bhagavad Gita. But even the Bhagavad Gita, even previous to that, I read a different translation of Bhagavad Gita. But I was crying when I saw Srila Prabhupada. But then he looked at me in such a way that I realized that my tears were totally based on the bodily concept of life, and he was not going to be impressed by my great emotion to see the pure devotee. He knew that it was this was some kind of a false show. So I couldn't. I had to stop. I stopped crying immediately, and I just felt that he just saw everything about me. And as the years went on, every time I saw Srila Prabhupada, I got a little bit less contaminated. And finally, about so many years later, I was happy that he saw me. I was getting a little purer, having teeny bit, understanding my position as a fallen soul. So I got a little bit, maybe shadow of humility. So but I found that very interesting how, and a lot of devotees I think experience this when Prabhupada looks at you. He looks at the soul. He was looking at the soul. Wasn't fooled by any of the material assets that we try to fool ourselves with.
I took initiation, and I was very nervous. And when I came up and he was asking me the 4 regs, I could hardly speak. And actually, when he looked at me, it was like when you have 2 magnets, I don't know if they're opposite or what, and they go like this. Well, my head just went boing. It was so strange. My head just jerked away really quickly, and I couldn't look at him. I felt that he was looking, that he could see right through to me, and he knew exactly who I was, where I was at. What a rascal. I was just thinking, it was very cleansing. I just really felt like he could see right through me, and it was too hard to take. So I couldn't look at him. And I looked back, and again, I had to look away. It was very, very intense. And then I got my beads, and and then he gave me my name, and he says, "This is the name of," he says, "My name, your name is Vrindavaneshvari. This is a name for Radharani." And it was so wonderful because it was also very funny. I had a very short name. I never liked my Karmi name, and actually I had Jai Tirtha give me a devotional name 2 weeks after I joined the temple because I just didn't want to have a Karmi name. And all the time I was also thinking that I wanted a really long name. My name was short, and I wanted a long name. So Prabhupada gives me this Vrindavaneshvari. It had 16 letters. Nobody from months could ever pronounce it. But it was very, very satisfying. It was just so nice. Prabhupada's mercy, he fulfills my desire.
Well, actually, the first thing he said was, and he laughed. He says, "Well, how do you like your name?" And I thought, well, yeah, fine. It's nice. And then I didn't realize afterwards that the reason he had named me Guna was because I'm from Laguna. So that was the thing. What it was, kind of funny. But it didn't click. I was just too in awe. So anyway, so he asked me to paint the Bhagavad Gita, and I said, well, how? And he said, you have to become like Sanjaya. And he said, Sanjaya, he saw the whole battle in his mind like a television. And I said, oh, all right, okay, I'll try, And then he talked about how Jadharani was painting it, even though she didn't really know how to paint, that she just did it, and Krishna instructed her and gave her the ability to do it. And I don't know how long I was there. And then you know, it probably was like maybe a half hour, and it was some little small talk here and there. And then he also wanted me to paint. He had the deities up there called the Kartamasha deities. And I don't remember if there's two of them. There's a little one and there's a bigger one. And I think he told me the story how he got that, and he told me how he wanted it to be painted over again. So he asked me to do that. And then he told me that, he said, you know, anytime, you know, you need to talk to me, just come up and talk to me, you know, and if you have any questions. But I never did, because I was, you know, Prabhupada had all his guards around and stuff, and I was always too shy just to go, oh, I need to talk to him, and you know, and I still beat myself on the head because I didn't do that.
When it came time to be initiated, I was in so much anxiety, and I was so overwhelmed with so many different feelings. Some people used to say, and I felt it too sometimes when you were in the presence of Srila Prabhupada, you felt like you were transparent. You could see everything about you, and not just that you were pure spirit soul, you could see all your Maya. So they sat me right next to Srila Prabhupada's right hand at the foot of the Vyasa-san, and Bhagavan was doing the fire sacrifice. And I couldn't stop crying, and the tears were just pouring down my face. But fortunately, I had a sari on, so I pulled it down over my face. And I wanted to be really careful. I'd seen a lot of initiations, and I wanted to make sure I did everything right. You know, say the 4 principles right, and say at least 16 rounds, not just 16 rounds, and speak loudly so he could hear me. And so when they called me up, I did all of that right. And then he said, so your name is, I don't remember what sequence, if he says your name first or afterwards. I think he said, so your name is, and it sounded like he said Barbara. And I thought, well, yes, that's already my name, or maybe Barbara means something in Sanskrit, I'm not sure. Then he handed me my beads, and I'd had like a slight surgery on my right hand, and it was hurting, so I reached with my left hand. And he said, right hand, but I couldn't understand what he was saying, and he wouldn't give me my beads. And, you know, I was really, you know, about to burst out into loud sobs, you know, and then Nanda Kumara kind of elbowed me and said, your right hand. So I reached with my right hand, and he handed me my beads. But I thought he'd changed his mind and he wasn't going to initiate me, that he could see I wasn't qualified. And then after the initiation, I walked out, and Nanda Kumar came up and said, so your name is, and I thought he said Brahmacharini. And I thought, well, I've got 2 children and I'm 6 months pregnant, but at least it's Sanskrit. Yeah. Then he handed me the paper, and it said Bhavatarini. He said, and you're very lucky because they didn't have a name. Pradumya picks all the names out, but because they didn't know you were getting initiated, Srila Prabhupada just named you on the spot. And that's Srila Prabhupada's sister's name. And later on, I got to meet her, and she used to call me Bhavatarini Dasi Dasi. So that was my good fortune that they forgot about me.
When I desired to get initiated, Gunagrahi, temple president in San Diego, actually recommended me for initiation, and because I had spent some time in the San Diego temple, and Jayatirtha did the sacrifice. So when I went up to get my beads from Srila Prabhupada, I paid my full dandavats because I was living outside of the temple, and I didn't know that there was maybe some kind of a rule that ladies shouldn't pay their dandavats, but I spread out right on the floor, paid my full dandavats, and then I got up, and I had this one little bouquet that I had made to give to Srila Prabhupada. So I extended my hand with the bouquet to present it to Srila Prabhupada, and I reached out my left hand to accept my beads. And Jayatirtha is standing on the side of Srila Prabhupada, and he said to me, don't accept your beads with your left hand, you accept your beads with your right hand. So I put the flowers in my left hand, and I extended the flowers in my right hand, in my left hand, and reached for my beads in my right hand. And then Jayatirtha says again, no, don't give Srila Prabhupada flowers with your left hand, you have to give it in your right hand. So I'm going back and forth, and meanwhile, I'm getting a little nervous. So finally, after this goes on a couple of times, Srila Prabhupada just looked at Jayatirtha. He said, it's okay. It's okay. So this was my first experience as feeling a fool in front of my spiritual master. Actually, all the little teeny anecdotes I have are just with that realization of being a fool in front of the spiritual master.
So I was waiting online, and the boy before me went up, but then he was sent down within a minute, and I said, what happened? And he said, Prabhupada sent me away because my bead bag was dirty. So I thought, oh my God, oh Krishna, this is it. So Satsuma goes, okay, it's your turn. I went, oh my God. So I froze, and I was really scared. I was thinking, oh my God. So I knocked on Prabhupada's door, and I didn't hear anything. And I thought, oh, well, what do I do? So I knocked on it a couple of times, and then I thought, well, let me just go in. And then I went in, I opened the door, and I went in, and I paid my obeisances. And I thought, in my mind, already I made offense. Prabhupada didn't allow me in. I already started off wrong. This is, I already made offense. So when I got up, Prabhupada went like this to me. And so I kind of went a couple of baby steps, and then Prabhupada was going like this to get closer. And so before I knew it, I was practically on his lap. And it was so intimate, because Prabhupada was sitting in his desk, and he had his Brahmin thread on, and his legs were up on the desk, and it was familiar. I felt like, I knew him. There was no heavy, like, oh, he's my spiritual master, and it was relaxed. I was very relaxed with him, and he was like enjoying, just being there. It was just wonderful. So, even though I was still nervous, it was really relaxed. Prabhupada made me relax. So his feet were on the table, and he was showing me. He goes, so you can do this? And he showed me with my hands, and I said, yes, Prabhupada. And then he said, so you're chanting 16 rounds? And I said, yes, Prabhupada. And Prabhupada gave me the mantra, and of course I didn't remember. I was too nervous. And he showed me with his hands, and then he said, so you will chant this mantra 3 times a day? And I said, yes, Prabhupada, yes. And he goes, so you will chant this mantra 3 times a day? And I went, yes, Prabhupada. And then he said it for the 3rd time, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, he's saying it 3 times, and there's a problem. Prabhupada already knows there's a problem. So then I said, yes, Prabhupada, I'm going to chant, yes, yes. He goes, okay. And he was very, very happy. And then I was going to leave, and Prabhupada said, so what have you brought me? And his eyes opened up, and I went, oh, because at that point, there was no way I was going to give Prabhupada this, no way. He goes, so what have you brought me? And then I said, this, Prabhupada. And then he opened up the wallet, and he said, he looked at the oils, and he said, it's from India? No, he said, spiritual sky. And I said, no, it's from India. He goes, oh, India, nice. And he pulled out the $20, and he waved it around, and he waved it around. And it was like, oh my God, I thought, he's acting like it's $1 million or something. The way he was just enjoying the money, just because he knew what I was thinking. He knew I was thinking that it wasn't enough, and that all the other devotees were bringing so much in Sankirtan, and that there was no way I could, So Prabhupada was so kind. He knew my heart. He knew what I was feeling, and he made it feel so good for me. He made it like I gave him $1 million. And then after, I just said, thank you very much, Prabhupada, and I left, and I was so satisfied. But last year, Prabhupada's festival time, I was telling some of my god sisters in Prabhupada's quarters the story. And it was so sweet to be in Prabhupada's quarters and tell the story. And then they were poking around a little bit, and they found a key. And they unlocked a drawer that was locked for 20 years, and in that drawer they found the wallet with the 3 incense, the oils. So Prabhupada saved it. That's how sweet and kind he saved that.
At one of the Monday night or Sunday night programs or Monday night programs, there were guests who would come for that. It was another feast. Prabhupada spoke there. At the end of his lecture, he asked if there were any questions. One very old lady asked why. She was practically in tears. She cried out, "Why have you come so late?" She was really sad that she had missed the opportunity to take to Krishna consciousness when she was younger. And Prabhupada said, "Because you are so late." So on another occasion, that same question was asked by another old person, and Prabhupada answered in a different way. He said, when the question was, "Why have you come so late?" and he said, "Because better late than never." So those stayed in my mind, that Krishna sends the pure devotee when someone's ready, and if you're not ready, then Krishna won't send.
A few days later, they had a large press conference in Berkeley. There were hardly any devotees there, and I was sitting right near the Vyasa-san, but there were quite a few, like 25 or 30 press people. And two of the questions that really struck me and have always stuck in my mind is they asked Srila Prabhupada, "So, Swami, when you die," and he immediately interrupted them, and he said, "I will never die." He said, "I will live on in my books." And then they also said, "So, Swami, what is the significance of these big carts?" And his eyes got really big, and he looked at them and he said, "Do you think that God should ride in a small car?"
2 elderly ladies in their 50s asked if they could see Srila Prabhupada, and I was the temple president, so I brought them in to see Srila Prabhupada, and they were very respectful, and they didn't know very much what to say. It was kind of silence, and finally they said, "Swamiji, we have been meditating for the last 20 years." They were thinking that Prabhupada would be very impressed. So he said, "So what have you achieved by your meditation?" And they thought for a moment, they said, "Silence. We've learned to become silent." Prabhupada said, "Stones are silent for millions of years. It is not a very great accomplishment to become silent." So that kind of set the mood for that discussion.
Prabhupada was going down to San Diego for a big festival that Bhaktidas was putting on. And they asked for a couple of volunteers, and I was just so, I don't know, maybe I was a Prabhupada groupie. I was just very attached to seeing Prabhupada every day, so I said, "I'll go down and help for the festival." Got to do some cooking and gets a little bit more mercy from Prabhupada. So the festival was very ecstatic, and then they went, Bhaktidas had arranged for, actually I just remembered something, that Prabhupada had made a statement, and I think it was in regards to actually why Bhaktidas did this. He said we should have a festival at least once a year for no reason. Just have a big Krishna conscious festival. It doesn't have to be a holiday. So we had this wonderful, wonderful big festival down there. And then he had arranged for it was a conference, not a conference, but Prabhupada was giving a lecture. And I think it was at a school. I just remember it was supposed to be something where the people were supposed to be the intelligentsia and, and it was an auditorium. And we had our big kirtan, and Prabhupada's looking at the devotees and encouraging everyone to dance. And then when the kirtan's over, it's very quiet. And it's very quiet. And Prabhupada's there in the front. It was like a little podium, those are called. And the first question that's asked, this woman stands up and says, "Why do you shave your head?" And Prabhupada, in a heartbeat, he jumped and says, "Why do you shave your legs?" So everyone was like stunned, you know, and there was not, you could hear a pin drop. Everyone was like, oh my gosh. We were all really scared. Prabhupada was very serious. And after a moment's pause, maybe a minute or two of silence, he says, better to have a cool head than cold legs. So everyone said jai, and it just kind of broke the ice, and the Karmis were laughing, you know. So anyways, that was all I remember of that lecture.
There was an Indian gentleman, young man, maybe late 20s. He had been visiting and kind of staying in one of the northern temples. But he wanted to see Srila Prabhupada, so he came in, and I was there also. And he said, I've noticed that your disciples, in the morning when they're chanting japa, some of them fall asleep, they nod out. So I would like to teach them yoga. I will teach them yoga principles, exercises, and then they won't fall asleep. And Prabhupada very politely said, yes, sometimes they fall asleep, but they'll learn and they'll improve. So he sidestepped the question, and the man insisted, no, I would like to teach them yoga. So if you'll just give me your permission, I will teach them yoga. Prabhupada said, no, it's not required. Bhakti yoga is. So the man became very adamant and insistent. He said, no, they're deficient, I must teach them. And Prabhupada then became a little upset and said, I know that they may have some deficiencies, but still they're better than anyone else. And he would not agree to having them teach yoga at temple. And the man, I think he began to argue more, and we asked him, to leave after that. But
there was one devotee with epilepsy, and Brahmananda said, oh, Prabhupada, he's following Dr. I don't remember the wording, and Brahmananda said, oh, why don't you take some pills, they work. You should use these Western medicine pills. And Prabhupada asked the devotee, well, is this treatment working, this fasting? And he said, yes. And Srila Prabhupada said, yes. If you are sick, then fasting is the best cure.
So Prabhupada had come to Hyderabad. We had all gone, 1975, we had gone down for the festival. All the devotees had went to India for the festival. So we went from Vrindavan down to Hyderabad because he had a big pandal set up there. So Prabhupada was doing the pandal festival in the evening. It was a 3-night program. And all the devotees were sitting up on stage. And the people, there must have been 1,000, 2,000 people there. Full house, outside pandal. So Prabhupada was like a lion when he gives these lectures, different from America. In India, a lot of Sanskrit, and he really pounds on the philosophy. He's like a lion, And so he finishes his lecture, and then they ask, are there any questions? So there's several questions, and then this one man comes up to the microphone, and he begins to explain how he's experiencing Krishna, and how he has realizations of Krishna, and he's seeing Krishna, and he's going on for an extended period. So some of Prabhupada's sannyasis are sitting around, and they're getting a little, they don't feel this is correct. He's kind of wasting time. So they start to move to take him away from the mic, and Prabhupada says, no, let him finish. So then he finishes the story. And then Prabhupada takes that whole experience of him telling of his experiences of Krishna and explains how a realized person never feels that they have seen God, that they always are feeling, where is Krishna? He described the Goswamis, Krishna Kirtana Gana Nayak and Ipano, and he explained the prayers of the 6 Goswamis and how, and actually Krishna conscious person never feels that he has seen Krishna, but he's always hankering to see Krishna. So that was something we learned on that we should never feel we are with Krishna. We should always be hankering to see Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada was coming to make some recording at Golden Avatar Studios. The tape ministry was called Golden Avatar, and I lived across the street with my daughter in these apartments. It was next to a fire station, and we called them the fire station apartments, something. So it was right across the street from Golden Avatar. So Prabhupada was coming, and I went across the street. I bought a fruit plate. I was just to present to him. We put it inside of the studio, right next to the seat that he would be sitting in. And there was just 4 or 5 devotees there. Finally, Srila Prabhupada was coming, and we were all standing around, just a few. And the driver parked the car, and the sidewalk was a little bit high, and the car was down a bit. You understand? So Prabhupada had to step up to get onto the sidewalk. The devotee who had driven Srila Prabhupada to the studio stepped out and opened the car door. And Srila Prabhupada, we had paid our obeisances, but gotten up by then. And Prabhupada was struggling a bit to get out of the car. It was difficult for anyone to do, but he was also an older gentleman, and it would have been nice for the devotee to extend his hand to help Srila Prabhupada to get out of the car. And I'm just watching this, and I'm feeling, please extend your hand to help Srila Prabhupada. And then I'm feeling like I should do that. I didn't do it. But the whole time that Srila Prabhupada went in, finally Srila Prabhupada got out of the car and didn't, with no assistance, walked himself to the door of the studio. So we waited an hour and a half. Srila Prabhupada was finished, and I was dying the whole time. I felt so guilty that I didn't extend my hand. That was a perfect opportunity to serve the spiritual master. I mean, probably it was best that I didn't do it. But anyway, Prabhupada walks out, and I go right up to Srila Prabhupada, who comes up to here on me, and I'm not so tall myself, 5'3", so he's up to here on me. And I walked over and I said, Srila Prabhupada, please forgive me for not helping you get out of the car. And he looks at me, and he said, what? I said, Srila Prabhupada, you came, and it looked like you maybe I should have helped you get out of the car because it looked like maybe you needed some assistance. Please forgive me. He looks to his servant. He said, what did she say? And then the servant says, oh, it's nothing important, Srila Prabhupada. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, it's very important. Please forgive me for not having helped you get out of the car when you first arrived. And he saw my face. He said, oh, it's okay. So Prabhupada's always telling me it's okay, and I'm being a complete fool in front of my guru. So that's another incident.
There were 3 of us sitting in the back, Pushta Krishna, Nanda Kumar, and myself. I was in the middle. Shyamasundar was driving, and Prabhupada was sitting in the front right seat. And he was kind of nodding off a little, it seemed. Or there was quiet, there was no talking, and I thought I would ask a very intelligent question. So I said, Srila Prabhupada? And he said, I said, how much association did your Guru Maharaj have with Srila Gorkishore Das Babaji? So as soon as I asked the question, there was silence, and it became a long silence, and both the other devotees who were sitting in the back seat began to chastise me, kind of silently, that I had asked a very foolish question. And they said, oh no, why have you? Yeah, I think even Shyamasundar turned around to give me a dirty look. I didn't think there was anything wrong with the question, but it turns out that they all thought that it was an inappropriate question. So after a very long silence, which appeared to me to be practically forever, finally Prabhupada said, why do you ask? And then I realized by that time that it wasn't inappropriate. And I said, I'm sorry, Srila Prabhupada, it was just a question out of curiosity, it wasn't important. And so he was silent, he didn't say anything more. So I learned the lesson that don't try to make small talk and don't ask questions that are not appropriate to your level of understanding or advancement or that are important. Don't just ask questions out of curiosity.
But also when he was sitting in that chair, now on the knob up above there, we'd actually try to grow some wheat there. Now I'm from wheat country. I mean, my family, we used to plant 1,000 acres of wheat every year. So wheat, I kind of grew up with wheat. It was just part of my life. And it was, when you go and expand your horizons, you're like, I meet people who didn't know anything about wheat. The only time they ever see it was like in a bread wrapper or something. And you know, and it was one of those kind of culture shocks for me as I was growing up. But so you get used to it. That's why people don't know anything about anything, you know, they don't know anything about wheat. So Prabhupada was sitting there, and he looked up at the field, and it must have been like July or something, because the wheat was just about ready to combine. And he looked up there and he goes, what did he exactly say? Something about just the wheat needs water, the wheat needs rain. And now I've just been listening all this time, you know, on the big shots we're talking to Prabhupada. I said, but now he's talking wheat. Now, you know, this is where I live, you know, I can talk now. And I go, and of course the only time, it's practically the only conversation I ever had with Prabhupada, I was disagreeing with him, you know. No, Prabhupada, it doesn't need any rain now, it's ready to harvest. And you don't want rain during harvest. Then all of a sudden I realized where he was coming from is that, he, you know, in his way he was saying is that the crop wasn't a good crop. The crop was weak. And so not only, and immediately I just went, you know, my respect for him went way up, because not only did he recognize that it was wheat, which is, you know, sounds funny if you're from the country, but it's just the way it is, that people wouldn't know a wheat plant if they saw it. And not only did he recognize that it was wheat, but he knew it was a poor crop. And now that starts to take a bit of an eye, you know, it wasn't, you know, he actually had some insight to it. And I realized that's what he meant, and I said, yeah, we'd had a kind of an off year that year, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But, so that was kind of neat.
I asked a question about eggs, and because I told Srila Prabhupada that some of the people say that there's nothing wrong with eating eggs because they take the eggs away before they're fertilized or something like that. I didn't understand the whole, you know, technicalities of how eggs are produced. But Srila Prabhupada answered that if they would allow the male and female to mix, then there would be fertilization and the eggs would become chickens. So that was the main reason that he gave.
I was in the sewing room, and Jayatirtha was taking Srila Prabhupada around and showing him, because they had just moved into the Berkeley temple, and he was showing him the new temple. And he came in and said, this is Kanka, and she is making canopies for the carts. And previous to that, my 2-year-old son, Krishna Kumar, had run into the room saying, Prabhupada's here, cookie, Prabhupada, cookie. So as soon as Srila Prabhupada came in and Jayatirtha introduced me, I said, Srila Prabhupada, my son, whenever he sees you, he says, cookie, cookie. And so Srila Prabhupada threw his head back and he said, he started laughing and he said, yes, the way to make a friend is to give him a cookie.
Once he was giving darshan on the roof and somebody brought him some mangoes. So he asked one of the brahmacharis to cut the mangoes, but they didn't know how to cut them properly. So then Srila Prabhupada actually took the mango and showed how to cut it in the proper way. And he said that a brahmachari should be expert in everything.
They were reading Krishna book, and Prabhupada said, I don't remember what they were reading, but he goes, yes, in India, all the girls must be married. And if a suitable husband cannot be found, then they are married to a tree. So we were all going, well, as we're leaving the garden, I wonder what kind of tree they marry the women to. And there was a devotee girl from India, and she goes, that was a joke. I had no concept that Srila Prabhupada could joke. You know, when I saw him, I had butterflies in my stomach. It was like so serious, you know. But that was a joke.
When we were in Portland, we were driving to one engagement and we stopped at an intersection, and Prabhupada looked around and he saw signs, enjoy Coca-Cola, things go better with Coke, drink Coca-Cola. It was kind of a coincidence that there were many of them on this intersection, the corner, different signs. And so Prabhupada said, so you should write one letter to the Coca-Cola company, and you should propose to them that they change the name of their drink to Hare Krishna. And they can keep the same drink, but then it will say, enjoy Hare Krishna, things go better with Hare Krishna. And he was kind of lightheartedly explaining that. From that we learned that we should try to promote Krishna consciousness on a very broad scale. Somehow or other get the holy name to the public, even by using media and all kinds of methods, whatever you have to do.
You know, one time Aniruddha came in and Prabhupada said to him, "So Aniruddha, you will be a Sanskrit scholar when you grow up?" And Aniruddha said, "No, Srila Prabhupada, I will be a cowherd's boy." Prabhupada said, "Oh, you will not be a Sanskrit scholar like your father?" And Aniruddha said, "No, I will be a cowherd's boy."
And so there was still some land that we hadn't bought up at that point. It was all like local people living there. And one of the kids, the local kids, had a motorcycle. And he was running up the road. He'd let that tractor go by, I guess. Okay. And this kid he'd come running up the road, and he was actually pulling right into the driveway where Prabhupada was talking. But he couldn't see. He couldn't see up in there that there was a lot of people in the yard. Then he'd turn it around and he'd rev it up a bunch of times and just roar down the road back to his house. It was just, he was a kid just running up and down a quarter mile on the Ridge Road there. So finally Kaladri, it was a little, because the kid would, like a kid on a motorcycle, make a lot of noise, peel out, head down the road. And he was just going back and forth. Kaladri says, and every time he'd come, he'd have to kind of stop and listen because it was so loud until the kid would leave. And finally Kaladri says, maybe I should ask him to stop. Prabhupada said, "Oh, don't. If you ask him to stop, he'll just do it more." Which was a pretty insightful way teenagers think.
Once we were walking on the beach in Jagannath Puri with Srila Prabhupada, and we were getting down near the edge of the ocean. Srila Prabhupada said that when I was a young man, just married, I came here dressed in cuddy cloth, and I was running on the beach and jumping in the waves. But now, he said, just see the position. And he was walking along with his cane. He said, do not think that this won't happen to you.
I was asked if I would like to go up to Srila Prabhupada's room in Los Angeles. This was maybe 73. Nanda Kumar invited me. He was his personal servant at that time. He asked me if I'd like to come up. So I said, sure. So I went up into Srila Prabhupada's room, and Karandar was there and a few other devotees. Not very many, maybe 2. And it was a very intense atmosphere. We just happened to come in, and they were telling Srila Prabhupada about the situation in Hawaii. And they were telling Srila Prabhupada that the group over there had introduced a system called psychic sleep. And they explained what psychic sleep was, that they would have everyone lie down, all the guests and everything, lie down on the ground. And they would turn the lights way down low, and they would play some kind of mystical music. And then they would suggest different things. It was a kind of like a suggested hypnosis, self-hypnosis type thing. And they would suggest to the people that now massage your legs and, meditate on your legs being massaged and different things. And then they would suggest, different things during that procedure. You're relaxing, you should relax now, and then think of Krishna and different things. Srila Prabhupada was becoming very upset when he heard this. He said, when I was there, they did not do this. Why have they started doing this after I left? And he said, this is an adulteration, and it is like the adulteration of milk. It was either pasteurization or homogenization or both of them, but he said, just like that is the first adulteration, And then they adulterate more, and after some time, none of the good of the milk is remaining, simply imitation milk. It may be colored white, but it has no value. He said, similarly, they will begin with this psychic sleep, and they will keep adulterating, and after some time, they will think that they need LSD to enhance their chanting. And I was shocked when I heard that, because I couldn't imagine how anyone could ever think such a thing, that LSD could help your chanting. And it always remained, it remained for many years just one of those enigmas. I couldn't quite understand what Prabhupada meant by that, why he made such. And then later on, I was in England, and sure enough, even one of our leaders thought that exact same thing, that LSD would enhance the chanting. So then I remembered that Prabhupada had predicted that if we weren't careful to avoid these kinds of adulterations, it could lead to further adulterations.
So Nandalal had come with me. She asked if she could come in the room. She wanted to ask Prabhupada a question. And earlier that day in class, she had asked Prabhupada, how do you become free from envy? And she was explaining to me that this was during the time when Siddhaswarupananda's group was breaking away. And she had heard that Prabhupada had said that they were leaving ISKCON because they were envious of the spiritual master. So she had asked Prabhupada, how do you become free from envy? Oh, not envious of the spiritual master, I'm sorry, they were envious. So she asked Srila Prabhupada, how do you become free from envy? And she was asking for the benefit of the Siddhaswarupananda people. I mean, she was telling me this, she was thinking, well, they were envious, and she was doing this for their benefit. Prabhupada looked straight at her and said, don't envy the spiritual master. So she said to me, he was like maybe thinking I was envious. And I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing her. This is what she was telling me later, and we've discussed this. She was thinking that she wasn't envious and the other people were, and Prabhupada misunderstood her question. So she wanted to ask him further. So she came in the room with me, and when Prabhupada and I had stopped speaking for a while, she said, could you explain further how to become free from envy? And Prabhupada said, just like Prahlad Maharaj, he was never envious, he was never afraid. When something bad happened, he thought, oh, here's my Lord, here's Krishna. And when something good happened, he thought, oh, here's my Lord, here's Krishna. So he was never envious, he was never afraid. And then she asked another question, and Srila Prabhupada looked at her and said a little sternly, read my books, it's all in the books. So she thought that maybe she was just asking questions to be talking, and he was like gently reprimanding her, and that she was envious, and like we all are in the material world, and so he was correcting that for her also. And during the time I was in there, Nipana, of course, was with me, and this was like 45 minutes to an hour with the 1.5-year-old. So at one point she started playing with the papers on Srila Prabhupada's table, and he said, no, no, no. So I took her away, and then she started playing with his feet, and I grabbed her, she's playing with his feet. I grabbed her, he says, you must learn to instruct this child properly. The papers she should not touch, but my feet, that is all right, they are hers. And then towards the end of the conversation, of course the reason, this is why it was the end, he drank some water, he held the cup up and poured it in his mouth. Then he held it out to Nipana and put it on her lips and offered her some water. She was getting tired, and you know how tired toddlers are. She decided to throw herself backwards and bang her head on the floor and start screaming. And so she threw herself backwards, banged her head on the floor, and Srila Prabhupada pointed to the floor and said, look, you've broken the floor. Your head is not broken, but the floor, you've broken the floor. And she got up, she didn't make a sound. She got up, she turned around, she was looking at the floor and rubbing the floor, and he motioned to me to take her out. So I took her out, but I actually hung around outside, and he was having a massage, and I could hear him speaking to Pandu about the paintings that he was doing, and that was very nice.
In '76, we had classes, Prabhupada was giving classes, but there was a lot of women with babies, and so we took turns One would go one morning and one would watch the babies. And I'm talking like 2 months, 4 weeks, real small. And we had them in those little seats, you know, that they lay in. So on my morning, I decided it would be real cute to line them all up. So when Prabhupada came out, he would at least look at them and they'd have that little contact with him. So I did, got them all lined up, and there must have been at least 5 or 6. And then he came out. Oh, I decided to step aside so that I wouldn't be seen. So, you know, I didn't want to be too close, and I didn't know really what the relationship of the woman should be around Prabhupada. And then, so I could still see him, but he couldn't see me as he came out of the temple. When he came out, he was like, I mean, the look on his face, he was shocked. What is going on? And he was saying, you know, he turned to Kirtananda, you know, where are the mothers? Where are the mothers? You know, and Kirtananda doesn't know where they are, but he's like trying to, oh, they must be around. I'm sure they're not far away. and then Kirtananda assured him enough so that he could, you know, he would move on. But he was very concerned about the children and that they should be watched and taken care of.
I was at the Laguna Beach temple, and at that time Krishna Kumar, my first child, was 6 months old. And they had decided, the devotees had decided, that the mothers should leave the temple room with the children during the lecture. So it was a very small temple room. It was the old Laguna Beach that overlooked the ocean. And you had to walk in front of the Vyasa-san. Srila Prabhupada was sitting there, and Tulsi Das, at that time was the president of the Los Angeles temple, asked all the mothers to go out with the children. I was hiding in the corner because I really, really wanted to hear the lecture. So he said, Kanka, you have to take your baby out. So I was the last mother to leave, and as I'm walking in front of the Vyasa-san, Srila Prabhupada said to me, where are you going? And I looked, Tulsi was sitting in front of the Vyasa-san, and I looked at Tulsi with a snarl in my eye and said, he said I had to go out. And Srila Prabhupada said, no. He said, you go sit down. And so I went and sat down, and Krishna Kumar was very good during the entire lecture, and I remember specifically that is the lecture where he was talking about the Garuda birds. And he said Garuda is actually the king of the Garuda birds, and it's a flock of birds that fly from planet to planet, and they lay their eggs in space. And so after the lecture, I was sitting out on the wall, and Srila Prabhupada came right, he was walking down to his quarters, but he stopped right in front of Krishna Kumar and me, and he smiled and he patted Krishna Kumar on the head, as if to say he knew that he wouldn't make any noise during the lecture.
When we were on a walk in Los Angeles, I told him that I was in charge of the Bhakti program at that time, and I told him that about some new devotees that had joined. One gentleman had joined at the age of 53, and he was a PhD and also a priest, a Christian priest. And so I told Srila Prabhupada that he had joined, and Prabhupada was very pleased, and he said, you must take very good care of him, give him special treatment, special care, make sure he's comfortable, everything like that.
One of the last times I saw him at the airport, this was actually when he was leaving and he was not arriving. So when he was leaving, he had to wait for a little while sitting in a chair and the devotees would sit around him very quietly, and we were just enjoying seeing Srila Prabhupada. So when we got there, before he got to sit down, the devotees were chanting, it was big kirtan, and actually then he did sit down. He did sit down, and he had all these big guns sitting around him. I believe it was Brahmananda and some other, bodyguards, and not letting anybody get too close. There was this one older woman. I'd say we were all very young, so she was old. She was probably in her late 50s, and she always seemed a little bit, maybe a little nutty, she would come to the temple almost every day, and she had a white uniform on. We didn't know what she was. We didn't know if she was a hairdresser or a nurse or whatever. She always had white uniform on and white shoes, and she would come by and maybe once a week just give some little drop of toilet paper, just drop off some little condiments, things like that. Maybe she got them from where she worked. And she was a bit of a character, and she was there at the airport. And she was within probably about 4 feet or so away, and I saw she was anxious. She was very anxious. She wanted to get closer to Prabhupada, and she couldn't see very good. And so I was in front, and I was watching, and Prabhupada points to her, and he tells the disciple to move out of the way, get out of the chair, and let her sit down. And it was so nice to see, Prabhupada setting an example to, give the seat to this woman. And that was very wonderful to see.
There was, in Mayapur, I was acting as one of his guards. We used to take turns guarding Prabhupada's room. And sometimes the guards got the opportunity to go in with guests and sit down. Once, this was interesting to me, one very old sadhu came to see Srila Prabhupada. Not very well dressed, very old and poorly dressed. And he came in, and I came in with him, and we sat down. And it was just Prabhupada and this. And they spoke probably in Bengali. And I couldn't understand it. But then after some time, Prabhupada went and took some money and gave some rupees to the sadhu. And the sadhu thanked him and went out. So I don't know what they spoke, but that was interesting.
And then I remember one time in the airport, so it's in my mind, it was TWA, and Prabhupada was sitting by himself. I was thinking, oh my God, how could Prabhupada be by himself? So I stood there, I was thinking, well, let me guard Prabhupada, I'm going to guard him, so a woman's going to guard him. And all the sannyasis, they were all huddled. I guess there was a problem with the tickets. And they were all in a big huddle, and I was looking and I was thinking, why isn't anybody here? So I kind of stayed by Prabhupada, and he was so cute, he knew what, that I was, and he was saying, don't worry, I'm fine, don't worry. But I stayed close, and in a way I was doing Sankirtan too, because I was preaching to the people who were on that flight, and I was telling them how fortunate they are, they were with pure devotee, and I was handing out back to Godheads, and I could see Prabhupada was very pleased that I was doing this just a tiny little service, but, I just felt so happy to just do anything for Prabhupada. And he was so appreciative.
Once we came to see Srila Prabhupada in Hyderabad, after we'd been touring along the east coast of India. So Prabhupada called us into his room. He was asking us how many sets of books we distributed, what did the professors think about the books. Then he told us that you should keep your health very good on traveling Sankirtan, and it's best if you don't eat any grains. Better just to eat vegetables and fruits, take milk products, and also nuts. And then he made a sign like that, cashew nuts. Every day like Ekadashi. In this way you can keep your health very strong.
We were doing Harinam. Prabhupada was still at the temple. We had organized a Harinam party with quite a large party. About 15 or 18 devotees. And there happened to be a big parade that day around through the downtown. So we were chanting, not in the parade, but through the crowds, and it was a very nice atmosphere. It was great. We had chanted so many times in Portland, and but suddenly, what seemed for no reason, the police came, and they just arrested us all and put us into vans and took us to jail. This had never been, we had never had that experience before. So we were in jail, and they said the bail is $50 per person if you want to get out. It was a Saturday. And the problem was that, the court wouldn't be seen until Monday. we couldn't be, our hearing wasn't, we weren't to be tried till Monday, so we would have to stay in jail till Monday unless we had $50 apiece to get out. Unfortunately, the temple had no money at that time, so we were stuck. And I was very sad, especially because I was supposed to organize all the programs for Srila Prabhupada there. So we were in a few hours, and then the warden came and said to me, "Are you such and such?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, so you're bailed out." So I was bailed out, and then I was told that Srila Prabhupada gave the money to bail me out. And then when I got back to the temple, he called for me, and I went in to see him. And he said, we had to save at least one. And it was very touching for me. And then he asked about the situation. He said, "So, what happened?" I said, "Well, we were chanting, and they arrested us." And he said, "Yes, Lord Chaitanya also had problems with the Kazi, with the kirtan." He said, "But if they object to the mridangas and the kartals," he said, "you don't have to play the instruments. You can just clap your hands and chant Hare Krishna," like that. So that was another instruction about chanting.
And one time, it was whenever he was in the room, we were all happy. We could do anything. We were superhuman. We were in Vaikuntha. And one time in a class, he said, "So, if you chant one chapter of Bhagavatam in Sanskrit every day for 1 year, at the end of 1 year, you will all be Sanskrit scholars. You can do this?" "Yes, Srila Prabhupada, Jai Srila Prabhupada." "All right, you will do this?" "Yes, Srila Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada." "Okay, you will do," I think 3 times he said, you do this now. And we all said, "Yes." I've never met one person who's done this. But when he said to do it, it seemed really easy. One time, about 2 years later, I did it for 6 months. So maybe I'm half a Sanskrit scholar.
Once I went into Prabhupada's room, and he was sitting in the corner with his head in his hand like this. And he just sat there for a few minutes with a pained expression on his face. And then he looked up at me and he said, "This Bombay project is such a headache, it's such a headache." Then he paused and then he said, "But it is for Krishna, so it is all right."
We went to one engagement with Srila Prabhupada. This was very, very impressive. He was supposed to be on television. It was a television show, and we went there, and there was a mix-up. And somehow or other, there was some confusion, and they were not prepared to have Srila Prabhupada on the television show. So there we were at the studio at the television station, and Prabhupada was standing there, and we had nothing to do. And just then a young man, early 20s, came up and said, "Well, I have a radio show that I conduct here, and I would be very happy to interview the Swami on my radio show if he would like to." And Prabhupada said yes. So we went up to his little studio. It was in the same building. It was just myself, Srila Prabhupada, and the interviewer. And he was very respectful. He really had a lot of respect for Prabhupada. And he was asking nice questions. Prabhupada was sitting on a stool, a kind of a high stool. That's all he had in there. And so at one point, the young man asked, "So why did you come to America?" And Prabhupada said, "To explain to people about what they have forgotten, love of God." And the young man said, "Does that mean that you're the Messiah?" And Prabhupada said, "Yes." And the young man took everything that Prabhupada said very seriously. That's why he asked if he was a Messiah. He thought, well, if you've come to teach about love of God, then you must be the Messiah. And Prabhupada said, "Yes, I'm the Messiah." And then he said, who sent you? And Prabhupada said, my Guru Maharaj asked me to come. So that was very interesting, because on one hand he was saying, yes, I'm the Messiah, the Savior of all the people, but not because God sent me, but because my spiritual master sent me to do this. So the young man was very impressed, very pleased with that.
Before Prabhupada came, New Vrindavan in '74, it was really, there was no support from anywhere. We were just eating weeds to live, literally. We were eating weeds. And so there wasn't much money, but there was just, some construction projects going on, and there were, so every little penny that came in, it was always, gee, should we, and we didn't eat rice. White rice was a Sunday feast item, to give you perspective. So the question is, okay, the Guru's coming, you want to do the right thing for the Guru. Well, which is more important, to use the money to push on the project, or since the only vehicles we had were all pretty junky, like trucks and old wrecky things. Nobody had a nice vehicle. Or should they rent a nice vehicle for Prabhupada to ride in? So it was like this whole back and forth went on for a couple weeks, and finally rent a nice vehicle for Prabhupada party sort of won out. So when Prabhupada came out from the airport, and my thing at that time was kind of like, going ahead, checking hallways and stuff. And so I got out to the car and opened the door, and he got in the car. And they went around. It was, the better car that you could rent at an airport. It wasn't like the Lumina or whatever, the equivalent in that time. It was the better car. And Prabhupada gets in, they go to start the car, and it won't start. It wouldn't start. I mean, this is, a rental car at an airport. Has this ever happened to anybody? I mean, and they'd driven the car, they'd picked the car up, they'd driven it over to the curb, so when he came out of the airport and got in it, it wouldn't start. It was completely dead, nothing. So then it turned out somebody's devotee's brother was there, and he had it wasn't a farm vehicle. So Prabhupada they got him out. They messed with it for like 10, 15 minutes, and nobody could get nothing. So they got him out, and he got in this other car and drove that down to the farm. They drove him down to the farm there. So it was sort of like, I always thought it was sort of funny that Krishna just sort of intervened. So you got kind of like, you made the gesture for the Guru, performed the sacrifice for the Guru, but you still got to keep the money. And that was pretty, to me it was kind of, there's always a logical explanation for anything. But it was kind of a little bit of a little miracle,
He wasn't feeling very well, and he wasn't eating too much, and everybody was concerned. And so one day Nanda Kishore decided to make Prabhupada a big feast. And the regular cooks at that time were Pradyumna and Satsvarup. They were taking care of the cooking together. So Nanda Kishore made a big feast. Satsvarup and Pradyumna made samosas, and I made something extra. I made some pineapple chutney. And so they served this huge meal to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada just ate the samosas and the pineapple chutney. And he said, this pineapple chutney has saved my life. So, Srila Prabhupada's mercy.
It was an interview, and there were call-ins on this show, and they were all Christians, and they were all asking about, what about Christianity, and what is your feeling about Christ? And Prabhupada said, yes, there is no difference. It is not sectarian. We are teaching the same thing, how to love God. He said, but we are giving more information, God's name and address, his mother's name, where he lives, and his mother's name, and how you can go there. And so he later on wrote me a letter about Portland. He said, I remember that when I was in Portland, there were many Christians, and they were asking about what our feeling about Christ is. And so our philosophy is that we don't say that you have to be this religion or that religion, but we're simply interested in love of God. And so Christ in that regard is teaching the same thing. After that particular interview, on the way back, I was driving, but Shyamasundar was speaking with Srila Prabhupada, and he was praising him, that Prabhupada, you answered so wonderfully. Your talks were, it was perfect the way you answered those questions. And Prabhupada said, really? You liked it? And Shyamasundar encouraged him more. He said, yes. He said, well, what did you like especially? And so he would say what he liked especially. And Prabhupada said, yes, that was a good point. And it was kind of like a boxer, just who had won the fight, and the trainer had said, oh, that was a great fight, and when you hit him with this one and that punch. And so Prabhupada was reliving the discussion somewhat like a boxer, that he had defeated them in their different arguments.
I went on 2 morning walks in Hawaii. He was there at 2 separate times, so I don't know which was which. But one morning walk, Bali Mardan said, look at these clouds, Srila Prabhupada, they look like birds. And Prabhupada said, yes, there are birds like bigger than this, and they perch on planets in outer space, and they lay their eggs while flying through outer space. So, I don't know what that all meant. And then another time, he said, why have they taken all the coconuts off the trees? They said, well, Srila Prabhupada, they think that the coconuts are going to fall on someone's head and kill them. And Srila Prabhupada said, that is not possible. Coconuts have eyes.
Once in Delhi, we were taking a morning walk in the park. So there was a man standing on his head doing some yoga exercises. So some of the devotees began to laugh at him. And Prabhupada cut them short. He said, don't laugh. He said, this makes the body fit for spiritual life.
I was selling spiritual sky incense, and I did a traveling route in Northern California. And I would stay sometimes at the house of Krishna Das, who was one of Prabhupada's first disciples from San Francisco. And Krishna Das had come back from Europe, and he had married a Swedish devotee, I think, and he had some children. And now he had resumed his jewelry business. And he was very gentle, very nice, and so we were friends. And I would stay at his house, but he had become more inclined towards Christianity than Krishna consciousness at this time. So we would have some discussions about that in the evenings. And sometimes, he would, there would be some debate, some disagreement about Christianity. And anyway, later on, not too long from that time, he ended up on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada in San Francisco. And he told Srila Prabhupada that one of his disciples had said that the Christians were nonsense. And Prabhupada said, who is that? Who said that? And Krishnadas said my name. And then Prabhupada, the discussion changed, and they continued on the morning walk. And later on in the morning walk, around the end, Prabhupada said, he turned and stopped and said, so where are the Christians now? It was around 6 in the morning. And Krishnadas said, well, Prabhupada, I guess they're sleeping. And Prabhupada said, therefore I say they're nonsense. So I was somewhat exonerated by that statement.
Then I'd come and be in the temple room when the greeting of the deities happened in the old temple. He'd come in from the back door, and the deities were towards the front. And we'd all go, Prabhupada, Jai. And one time he was coming in the door, and I was yelling, Prabhupada, Jai. He turned around and looked at me, raised his eyebrow, like, what? I didn't have anything to say. I was just yelling like a cheerleader at a football game, So I didn't have anything to say, so I just paid my obeisances, But after that, I realized he was a person. Before that, it was just kind of, he wasn't real to me. And then he looked at me, waiting for me to speak, and I was flabbergasted. I didn't have anything to say. And I pretty much didn't say anything to him the entire time, but I listened.
Once a professor from the university in Aligarh offered Srila Prabhupada a set of Bhagavatams which included the commentaries of all the different acharyas. So I was requested to go and pick the books up from Aligarh. So I went there in the temple car, and it's about a 3-hour journey from Vrindavan. And when I got there, that professor showed me those books, and they were in 2 piles on the floor. One pile was cantos 1 to 9 plus 11 and 12, and the other pile was 10th canto, which contained about 11 commentaries. So I was about to take the books, and the professor said, I would like to become a life member in exchange for these books. So I wasn't sure what to do, but I thought I've come all this way and Prabhupada needs these books, so I'd better take them somehow or other. I said that I'm sure you'll be able to become a life member, but I'll have to ask Srila Prabhupada. In the meantime, I'll take the books back to him. So when I brought the books back, Prabhupada examined them and he was pleased. He said, these are suitable. Then I told him that that man wanted to become a life member, and Prabhupada said, these books are worth 1,000 rupees. Tell him to pay the balance and he can become a life member. So that time life membership was 2,222 rupees. But when that man was informed, he didn't want to pay. He wanted to take the books back, but actually Prabhupada never gave the books back. And I think that matter was only settled many, many years after Srila Prabhupada's departure. But Prabhupada used those books for translating the Srimad Bhagavatam and writing his commentaries.
We had told him that we were having more classes for the bhaktas, and he said it's a good idea to have more classes for the bhaktas, but they should not go beyond the jurisdiction of our books. So that's been a guiding principle for our bhakti programs, is that we just teach from Prabhupada's books. He also mentioned about theater. He said theater based on Bhagavatam topics was a very nice way to present Krishna consciousness to the people in general. So that could be employed.
This is in a letter to me. He wrote me a letter, and he told me to worship Lord Chaitanya in my home and chant at least 16 rounds and read his books every day, and Maya will never touch me. And he told me that to always remain in the fire of Krishna consciousness. And he said that, and then your spiritual master will pray to Krishna for your spiritual advancement. So that's what I do in my life, try to do at least those 3 things every day. Follow his instructions.
The other thing I remember, this is actually in a letter, but it was a significant instruction from Prabhupada, and that was, Aniruddha was a lot younger then. I think he must have been about 1.5 or 2 at the time, and we were living in Coconut Grove, Florida. And I got this opportunity to take care of the deities there. And I thought, here's my chance to do a really important service. So I started doing that, and some other devotees took care of Aniruddha pretty much full time. And I wrote to Srila Prabhupada and I mentioned to him about this. And I had quite a chastisement about that through the mail. He said that it was very important, that these taking care of the children was just as important as doing deity worship. One service was not more important than the other. And he said, these children aren't ordinary children, they are Vaikuntha children. They have been sent by Krishna himself. So, he told me to stop doing the deity worship and take care of Aniruddha.
Prabhupada had just come in, and it was about 150 devotees there. It was tumultuous kirtan going on. And Prabhupada came in the door, and everyone was so happy to see him, and it was ecstatic. The kirtan was thundering. And Prabhupada stopped, and he saw Umapati. And Umapati was one of the first devotees. And evidently Prabhupada hadn't seen him for some time. And he stopped, and he began speaking with Umapati, and the kirtan died down or stopped, I forget, but it must have stopped because we could hear what he was saying. So Prabhupada said to Umapati, "Oh, it's very nice to see you. So you're here now?" And Umapati said, "Yes." And he said, "So what are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I have a job. I'm doing some computer work, and I live outside." And Prabhupada said, "Oh, that's very nice." He said, "So are you giving 50%? And Umapati said, "Well, Srila Prabhupada, I'm not getting that much money, and the expenses, my apartment is." Prabhupada said, "You must give 50%, no matter how much or how little you earned." And then he walked off. And he left Umapati there somewhat dumbstruck by that statement. No compromise.
Once I was in Srila Prabhupada's house in Vrindavan in 1974 during the Mayapur Vrindavan festival. And that time Madhavisa Swami was in the room and he was just leaving. So he was saying goodbye to Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was thanking him for his service. Prabhupada told him that you are a perfect leader. And he said, "I'm just trying to follow you, Srila Prabhupada." So Prabhupada replied, "Of course," he said, "without following properly, you can never become a perfect leader."
I suppose everyone knows how he entered the temple room as they blew the conch shell and the deity doors open, and then he'd walk up to Gaur-Nitai's altar, pay his dandavats, and then we'd all pay obeisances, and then he'd go to Rukmini Dwarkadish, pay his dandavats, and he'd take Charnamrita, then he'd pay his dandavats, and then go back and sit on the Vyasasana and play a gong or cartels and start Jaya Radha Madhava. And one time they gave him Charnamrita, and they used to fill his hand up. They had like a ladle. They'd pour a whole ladle of Charnamrita in his hand, his right hand, of course. And one time he took the Charnamrita and he says, "This is so nice, I would like to have some more." So I was expecting that he'd put his hand out and he'd get some more. But he just washed his hand and paid his dandavats and went on. And Hari, my husband, said one time, well, maybe he was showing the example how we only use everything for Krishna's service, not for our own pleasure. So it tasted so good, he said, "I'd like some more," but then he just paid obeisances.
He was touring the Spiritual Sky offices in Los Angeles. They were very modern and very, this was during the height of Spiritual Sky's success. It was a huge building. And Prabhupada was looking at everything, and he asked about some machine, and they were telling him. And he said, don't be extravagant in your purchase of machines. So that was a nice instruction. Later on, that machine was stolen somehow or other. So it had an effect on me because I remembered Prabhupada saying that, don't be extravagant. So he approved of using machines in Krishna's service, but not extravagantly. Otherwise, Krishna would take it away. And that happened in that case.
In 1973, I was made the president of Bury Place Temple in London. Just before that, the previous president had formed a organization called the Radha Krishna Guild, Radha Krishna Temple Guild, which was made up of congregational members who wanted to do some service. So the guild did things like buying gates for the deities. And once in a darshan in the manor, one of the ladies from this guild stood up and she started making some complaint in Prabhupada's room. So afterwards, Srila Prabhupada called me into his room and started chastising me. He said that actually we don't have, afterwards, Srila Prabhupada called me into his room and started to chastise me. He said that we only have one kind of membership, that's life membership. We don't require any other kind of membership like guild membership. Then he said that only properly qualified persons should be allowed to speak in the temple. And he kept repeating that point. He would have repeated it 4 or 5 times. only the most qualified person should be allowed to speak in the temple room.
Once, 1974 Rath Yatra, the temple president there had organized a special ceremony for Srila Prabhupada's pleasure. And the idea was that the temple presidents from the centers would all get together and they would have an auction. And they would auction off different services in the ceremony that they could offer to Srila Prabhupada, like bathing his feet with different substances, you know, honey and milk and yogurt, fanning him and doing different things for him, and then the money that was collected would all be given to Srila Prabhupada as dakshin. So I just by chance, I was a household at the time, and we had received some money, some small inheritance, a few $1,000s. So I thought this was a good opportunity. So I had some money, and I bidded very high, and I won a lot of the different services. And the one I wanted the most was to bathe Srila Prabhupada's feet with the honey. So so we actually got to do that, and he agreed. So I was bathing his feet, washing his feet with the honey, and I was taking my time. I wanted to get my money's worth. And Prabhupada at one point looked down and said, hurry up, because he saw that I was... So I could understand that it wasn't that he was enjoying someone bathing his feet and giving him so much respect and worship, but he did it as a service, and that we shouldn't try to... Also, we shouldn't try to enjoy the spiritual master, we should just do our duty. That's what I got out of that.
So during the time that Srila Prabhupada was in Los Angeles, I think this was in 1974, he was doing a lot of translation work at this time, and there was a typewriter downstairs in his apartment. He lived upstairs, and there was a typewriter right downstairs, and I was doing all the transcribing then, and he was translating so much that I was typing from morning till night, and he mentioned about how he was happy to hear the typewriter, the sound of the typewriter going. And that I was working so hard. And then one day he called me up to his room, and he took out this gold bangle, and he said this Indian woman had given him this bangle, and he looked at it and he said, "It is solid gold." And he said, "I would like you to have it. You have been working so hard on my books." So I said, "Thank you, Srila Prabhupada."
Just in the beginning of '73, and he said that I'm very pleased to hear the good news of the traveling party in England, and I'm pleased to hear that the people of that country are interested in Krishna consciousness and they're taking our books. So you go on in this way, traveling to every town and village. Don't worry about your destination. Just go on preaching Krishna's message and distributing his books. Sometimes he said it must be very cold there and you mustn't be getting proper sleep or proper food, but because you've properly understood the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, therefore you've surpassed the feats of millions of yogis and transcendentalists and come to the topmost platform of surrendering to Krishna. So this is my challenge, that let anyone see how hard our devotees are working for Krishna and how they have surpassed the feats of all yogis and transcendentalists.
At the initiation ceremony of sannyas initiation, Brahmananda Vishnujan, Subal, and Gargamuni. One thing I remember very distinctly in the lecture, he told them, he said, taking sannyas doesn't mean that you will be free from sex desire. He says, but now you cannot act on it.
I said, well, what do I do when I need extra money? And Sudama goes, Srila Prabhupada, she does bake sales. And Prabhupada goes, no. And I said, I could pick guavas. And Srila Prabhupada goes, no, you are a woman, you have a child, you must not strain, you should not strain. I said, well, I like to distribute your books. Yes, you do that. There will be a profit. You keep that.
Once we had a program in Kensington Town Hall in London, and it was packed out. It was a wonderful reception for Srila Prabhupada. At the end of the program, one Christian asked a question, and Prabhupada asked Rabharinandan Swami to get up and answer that question. So Rabharinandan Maharaj answered him in a very convincing style, completely defeated him. And the whole audience erupted in applause. And I was sitting on the side of the stage, and I just remember seeing Srila Prabhupada turn round towards us, and his whole face lit up in such an effulgent smile, it just looked like the sun. He was so happy to see how his disciple had defeated this rascal so convincingly.
While we were in Berkeley, and Srila Prabhupada was there, Jayananda Prabhu one day asked me if I would like to go with him to see Srila Prabhupada. And I said, of course. So we walked over. It was, several blocks. And on the way, we saw some very big, beautiful roses, gorgeous roses. It was summertime. So Jayananda said, let's see if we can get those roses. So we went up to the door, and he knocked on the door, and he asked the lady, he said, I'm going to see my guru, we're going, can we take 2 roses? And she said, yes, of course. So we took these big, beautiful roses, and we went to see Srila Prabhupada, paid our obeisances, and gave him the rose. And it was a nice discussion. It was basically, the discussion was between Prabhupada and Jayananda. And then at one point, Prabhupada asked him, he said, we have many construction projects in India. We could use some help there. Would you like to go and help with the construction? And Jayananda Prabhu said, no, Srila Prabhupada, I'd prefer to stay here. I think, I'd prefer to stay here. And Prabhupada said, oh, okay, that's fine. And I remember thinking that, I would have said yes, because I could see that Prabhupada wanted it, but Jayananda didn't say yes, but Prabhupada respected his wish, and so I could understand that, Prabhupada had a lot of confidence in Jayananda's decisions about those types of things. Then Prabhupada explained, he said, he asked about Chidananda, who was one of his disciples. And it turned out that, so we told him a little bit about Chidananda, that he had been in a hospital and things like that. And Prabhupada said he should be given very nice care. Should take very good care of him. He's a pure devotee. He was willing to give his life for Krishna, because when they were in India, evidently Chidananda was very ill, maybe tuberculosis or something. Maybe it wasn't tuberculosis, but it was like that. And Prabhupada said, I could see he was getting thinner every day, and I advised him to go back to the West, but he wanted to stay and do his service. So Prabhupada, said we should take very good care of him. Prabhupada appreciated the service of his disciples who were willing to give their lives for the service of Krishna.
So I went to San Francisco, and Srila Prabhupada came for the Rath Yatra. And actually, I didn't have any close association with him there, but I got second initiation by letter, because Bhutatma wanted to have a fire sacrifice at the San Francisco temple so that we could have a big festival. And so I was really disappointed, because I heard that Prabhupada a lot of times touched your hand when he gave you second initiation, and I thought, I really wanted to get it personally, because it would probably be the only opportunity in my entire life to have the personal touch of Srila Prabhupada physically on my hand. The devotees weren't touching his feet, especially the women, so I was disappointed. But then after the initiation, Jayananda came to me, and he said, he was so kind. I mean, that's another amazing part of Krishna consciousness, was his association. He said, I'm going to see, he came to my room. I had my own room because I had a child, so I wasn't in the ashram, in the Brahmacharini ashram, but I was in the temple. I had my own room. He came to the door. He knocks on the door. He goes, I'm going to see Srila Prabhupada in Los Angeles. Would you like to have me take him some Guru Dakshin? And I said, I don't have anything. And he points to a drawing I'd done of Krishna, and it's just his face with his flute and a garland, and he's up in the clouds, and it said Om underneath it. And it was a pencil drawing. And a lot of people had told me it was bogus, it wasn't bona fide, it was impersonal because Krishna was in the cloud and none of his associates were there. So I never would have thought of giving that to Srila Prabhupada. But when Jayananda goes, oh, that's nice, I just, I forgot all my doubts and hesitations, and I said, okay, you can take that to Srila Prabhupada. I had it in a frame. And then he said, would you like me to ask him anything? Well, I heard that all you were supposed to ask the spiritual master was how to serve him. So I said, please ask him how I can serve him best. So about a month later, Jayananda got a letter from Srila Prabhupada, and of course it discussed other things, and it said, to thank Bhavatarini Dasi for her drawing of Gopal Krishna. So that was like, oh, it's Gopal Krishna, it's not impersonal. And he said, as far as she can serve me, the best service is to chant Hare Krishna always and spread it to every town and village.
Once I remember he asked me about my personal life, where do you come from, and how long have you been in the movement? And then after I told him, he said, well, you're from Britain, the British expanded a big empire, so you spread the empire of Krishna consciousness. Actually told me that perhaps 3 different occasions. Once I brought my parents to see Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was very courteous to them. He took off his garland and he asked me to put it on my father. Then he said that, nice son, nice father. Whenever the son becomes a devotee, then 10 generations in the past and 10 generations in the future will be delivered. So my parents were very, very much impressed by Srila Prabhupada's kindness and courtesy.
I was really amazed how, there's people coming from so many different walks of life, how the main, factor that brought everybody together is that everybody fell in love with Prabhupada. That was that. And then the things that the devotees were, we didn't really know him. He was just some man from India wearing, in our eyes, strange clothes, and all of a sudden all these devotees were doing odd things, at least in the material standard, like wearing the sheets practically. And in fact, those days we were wearing sheets because we used to buy these big bolts of like either yellow or saffron polyester cotton material. And they were like, it was kind of stiff. And so when you danced in it, especially when it rained, it got all black on the bottom. It never went away. And they were all like community saris and community dhotis. Everybody kind of shared their stuff, So my impression of Prabhupada was that everybody just fell in love with this man, and they were willing to just completely change their lives because of him. And there's that saying of Prabhupada says that a devotee is one that when you see him, you think of Krishna. So Prabhupada's non-different than Krishna in that sense, that when we saw Prabhupada, we really felt like that, it was like being with Krishna himself.
He was just this incredibly loving, wonderful father figure. He was the warmest person. I don't think I knew love until I met Srila Prabhupada. That's what stands out to me. He was, incredible preacher and knowledgeable and self-realized, but the greatest thing for me was his warmth, his incredible warmth and love.
So his last visit to London, 1977. We were very disturbed to see him so thin and weak-looking, wearing sunglasses, and had to be carried on the palanquin. But still, we were thrilled to have his association. And he would only come down in the morning, be carried down on the palanquin, downstairs at the Bhaktivedanta Manor, into the temple room, and he didn't move, but the kirtans were, all the devotees from, at least a lot of the devotees from Europe, Germany had come over, and some of the devotees from Paris, and all the English devotees. It was packed with very enthusiasm. All the Sankirtan devotees were there. And the kirtans were really strong. And Prabhupada would be sitting like this with his hands folded, and he wouldn't move, but all he would do during the kirtans, at some point, he would move his finger like that. And when he did that, everyone saw him moving his finger. They all began jumping and dancing in ecstasy. Just like before, when he would dance and put his arms up, everyone would be forced to get up and dance. But the potency was still there, but he was just moving his finger. And so I had the service of putting Charnamrita in his hand. His fingers were so swollen that it was like little balloons. His ring was, there was no way he could get the ring off, but that's all he would do. We'd put the Charnamrita, could put not more than just 3 very tiny drops because he couldn't eat anything. But he would take it and then we'd wash. And it so happened that during that time, he was rushed to the hospital. We didn't know what for, but later on we found out he needed some emergency operation, minor operation at that time. And he was there that was Vyas Puja while he was there. And on that day he came down, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj told the story of Srila Prabhupada's coming to start the movement, and did a very long explanation, or telling details of his preaching in the early days and everything. It was wonderful. Prabhupada was very pleased by that. He was reliving his whole preaching, movement, how he started and everything. And once in a while, Prabhupada would speak. He would interject something. I remember one part, Tamal was speaking about Prabhupada's preaching in Los Angeles in the early days, going to different houses, and Prabhupada interjected and he said, I was even going to the garage, to a garage to speak. So Prabhupada interjected that because they had programs at a garage.
The last time I got personal instructions from Srila Prabhupada was in July of 1977. We'd been preaching in Bangladesh, and just around that time there was a disturbance in Mayapur where the temple was attacked by some Muslims. And it came out in the papers in Bangladesh that cruel foreign Vaishnavas attacked the timid Muslim villagers. So we'd been doing very big programs around Bangladesh, and the National Security Intelligence actually arrested us and told us to leave the country. So I came to Mayapur and discussed with my GBC, Jayapataka Maharaj, and suggested that it might be good to open a center in Nepal. So he gave me a letter, and I went to Vrindavan to see Srila Prabhupada. So that time Srila Prabhupada was very, very ill. I'd never seen him in such a condition. I went up to see him on his balcony on top of his house early in the morning, and he was wearing dark glasses and he looked very, very thin. But as soon as I came, then he began to speak to me and thanked me for going to preach in Bangladesh. And then he's told a story about one Bengali poet called Michael Madhusudan Dutta, who went to England, but he was very frivolous and he lost all his money. So then he was begging money from different gentlemen. No one was giving him any money, but finally one person called Istachandra Vidyanagar, finally one person called can't remember the name. Finally one Bengali gentleman gave him a donation. So he said to that gentleman that you've got the courage of an Englishman and the heart of a Bengali mother. So Srila Prabhupada said that similarly you should preach with the courage of an Englishman and the heart of a Bengali mother. The British were famous for courage and expansion and spreading an empire all over the world. In fact, even America is created by the British. So in the same way, you should spread the empire of Krishna consciousness. And he said, if you need money, you take foreign currency, I'll give you, and you go and preach in these countries. You've got two nice fields of preaching, Bangladesh and Nepal. So I said that we need some foreign currency to show the government every month in Nepal, otherwise you can't extend your visa. So Prabhupada asked how much we needed, and I said $600 a month. So he said, you take that money, if you open a bank account, I'll send you the money every month. And similarly in Bangladesh, I'll send foreign currency and you can print books and preach there. And you should publicize that this is A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami's money. You ventilate this in the press. Prabhupada used this word, ventilate it in the press. This is not American government money, but it's my own money which I've earned by writing books and printing those books and selling the books. So in this way he gave his blessings. He said, you take the courage of an Englishman and the heart of a Bengali mother and preach. So that was the last instruction I got from Srila Prabhupada.
His compassion for all the living entities, he could turn the whole world into Vaikuntha just by walking. He could turn the airport into the spiritual world just by walking through it and make everyone free from anxiety. And then he'd tell us, oh, you haven't even tasted one drop. You're just licking the outside of the bottle. But just that outside of the bottle that we were getting by his association.
I think Prabhupada's uncompromising principles, that he didn't change the original teaching to accommodate people who might not appreciate how strict he was. There was, just to give an example, there was one kind of a bogus New Age type guru of sorts, and he put out some propaganda, some promotional brochures, and he said, and if you join our organization, you should do so because you don't have to follow, you don't have to give up illicit sex, you don't have to give up eating meat, fish, or eggs, you don't have to give up intoxication, and you don't have to give up gambling. So where did he get those? In other words, Prabhupada had set the standard by strongly presenting that, so much so that even this man, he was using Prabhupada's standard as saying, for his own preaching, you don't have to give up these things. So that impressed me the most, that Prabhupada didn't change anything. He just kept it as he got it from his spiritual master and presented it unchanged. And he had faith that if he did that, that everything would be successful, Krishna would be pleased, and everyone would be satisfied.
Srila Prabhupada was extremely humble, and he gave all credit to his spiritual master. Once when he was leaving the manor, Srila Prabhupada said that I have no qualification. My only qualification is that I tried to follow the instructions of my spiritual master. Then he stood up to leave, and before leaving the room he went over to the picture of his spiritual master and touched his head to his lotus feet, and then he went.
Sakal